All right, hey everyone. I think it's time to begin. Hopefully everyone has made it here. Hey guys, second meetup. Welcome. Once again, we meet online. And like I said, this is the second one. Hopefully some of you have attended the first one. We had unexpected amounts of attendees and questions answered. This will be a bit more condensed, a lot more technical topics. But same as before, we'll have Q&A. So all of your questions, please address them to the Q&A section. Our support engineers, myself included, will be taking a look at that Q&A section and answering all of your questions as fast as we can. I imagine there will be quite a few of them, just like the last time. All of our microphones, besides myself and my colleagues here, are going to remain muted. So any questions, Q&A. If you wish to have some sort of a discussion, please use the chat for it. So questions in Q&A, discussions, applauses, anything like that, general networking, that goes in the chat section. If you wish, you can use hashtag to share any questions, comments, screenshots of this. Hey, via hashtag Zabbix Meetup online, I'd probably like to ask some of my colleagues to post that hashtag in the chat so it's readily available for you guys. So we're going to be having 3 speeches today. 3, like I said, very interesting speeches. And actually, without further ado, I'm going to be the first one to begin. So what I'm going to be covering, our first speech, is going to be upgrading to 5.0, best practice and common pitfalls. So let me set up my presentation in a moment. Let me set up my screen sharing. I have everything ready, just a matter of clicking a couple of buttons. And we should be good to go. Can you guys confirm that you're seeing? Let's see, can we confirm? All good, okay. Let's begin. So upgrading to 5.0, best practice and common pitfalls. So 5.0 is out. I think this is something that you guys would like to have a refresher course on, upgrading. And there are some things to take into account when upgrading to 5.0, some new things, some old things actually that still stand true if you were upgrading from 3.0 to 4.0, for example. Let's go through them. Let's just briefly remember some of the more advanced procedures that we have to do. So we're going to have 3 sections. First one is preparing for the upgrade. So we'll take a look at the requirements. Some of them are new with the release of 5.0. We'll take a look at how to perform proper backups and how we should schedule and estimate our downtimes. So let's begin with the requirements. First off, we have increased the minimum supported version of PHP, which is now 7.2 up from 5.4. So kind of take care of that when you're upgrading. Have to take into account that, hey, now the minimum version is 7.2, so maybe you'll need to update your existing PHP version. To those of you who are using embed TLS library for encryption, nowadays we have dropped support for it because end of life for it, and we don't want to support insecure libraries. So please switch to any of the other supported libraries. Added support for libSSH for newer platforms like our HEL8. Another thing to consider if you're upgrading on our HEL8. Minimum version of MySQL that is supported upped a little bit from 5.03 to 5.562. Same for Oracle, same for PostgreSQL. And of course, as you may already know, support for timescale 1.0 or later, which is going to be this feature timescale is going to be featured in my talk and some of the future talks later on. And IBM DB2 support dropped because maybe I've already talked about this before, but we looked at who's using it. No one's pretty much using it in production. It costs us quite a bit of additional development overhead, so it was dropped. Now let's begin with preparing for the backup. So a couple of steps, not all of them related to Zabbix, but all of them are a good practice. So first off, check for any OS updates. If you decide to apply any of those, please apply them and let your instance run for a couple of days, just to rule out that updates won't be causing any further issues down the road. Because if you update your OS If you update your DB, for example, also, and if you upgrade Zabbix at the same time and you have issues down the road, it's going to be a lot harder to rule out the potential causes for those issues. Was it some OS update that broke everything for me, or some things? Was it the DB update? Maybe it's unstable or something, or was it Zabbix itself that I upgraded and hey, things are not working? So do it step by step. Update the OS, give it a couple of days, update the DB, give it a couple of days. If everything is still stable, move on to the Zabbix upgrade. And that's after everything is done, that's when you can finally upgrade Zabbix. A couple of more things to take into account. Check for any custom solutions used in your Zabbix instance. I'm talking modules, I'm talking scripts, I'm talking compiling, completely from scratch with some custom source code of your own in Zabbix. Have to take that into account when you're upgrading, because chances are some custom things could be broken and maybe provide some unexpected behavior for you because they're custom. We're not aware of them when we're developing the upgrade. For upgrading from versions lower than 3.0 and 3.0 itself, partitioning will have to be temporarily turned off for the upgrade process. You have to be careful with that if you are using it, and if you have 3.0 or older, you can bring it back up after you have upgraded, but for the duration of the upgrade, you have to turn it off, otherwise your upgrade won't be happening. I see my colleagues already telling in chat that yes, please try to ask questions about the current topic. Yeah, Q&A section is there for you. So at the end of this topic, once I'm finished, I will be answering your questions. So go ahead, don't be shy. Either me or my colleagues are going to cover those questions. Okay, so partitioning is turned off. Next up, like I said, custom modules or patches. Let's take that into account. Probably are going to be broken. And another thing that you should consider, take a look at the available packages. If you're using an older OS, say CentOS 6 or something like that, take a look if there are packages available for your OS. Maybe your current distro or OS version is way too old. It's not supported anymore. So it could be better to essentially migrate to a completely new server with a new fresh OS, future-proof your instance, so to speak. Otherwise, compiling from scratch each and every time, if you're doing upgrades, essentially, if you're even upgrading to major versions, not just LTS versions, could be a pain in the back for you. Of course, depends how fine you are with compiling things from scratch. Could be it's a fun little task for you that you do with joy. So in that case, no problem at all. So what to back up? Perform the database, backend backup, server, and front-end file backup. I will go into the specific what should be backed up for each of those. Backup any custom scripts, modules, or anything else like that. Of course, we want to preserve them in case they get broken during the upgrade, and backup the config files. For most of the components, they should be preserved, but there are some specific use cases when they could get deleted or corrupted and so on. Rather safe than sorry, as you know. So how to back up your Zabbix config? So we have a couple of things over here. We're backing up the external scripts, of course. We're backing up our Zabbix config, server, proxy, agent, whatever else, our web front end, and a couple of other web-related things that could come in handy later on if we're, for example, using old schema from the doc folder for some reason when we're storing a backup or something like that. So back all of those things up to a safe location. They're not too heavy. It's a matter of minutes doing this. So don't be lazy about it. Next up, what you probably want to back up, what is quick and painless, is backing up your config tables. This is a large command. These slides will later on be available on our blog, so we'll have these commands available. It's quite a long one, but what it does is it backs up all of your config tables. See the ignore table Zabbix history, meaning we are backing everything but ignoring the history and trend tables because they tend to be the really large ones. I'm talking terabytes potentially. Backing that up could be quite a long process, a long procedure. Of course, if you can take the snapshot, for example, of the whole DB VM, go ahead. But if time is of the essence, then just back up your config. That's the key. That's what matters here. You want to preserve that. Then we're going to talk about estimating the downtime. So how to estimate the downtime for my upgrade. So first off, I can execute this here query to check the size of a database. This will give me like a large picture. Okay, how big of a chunk of data am I working with over here? But probably that's still not enough. That's just a general overview. If it's going to be like 10 gigs, 20 gigs, something like that, then yeah, you have an idea. Okay, it's a small database. I should be fine. But if it's something larger, if we're talking about hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes, then maybe you should check the size of specific tables. So check the size of tables, check how much your config is in size, how much your history tables are in size. Also, event tables and some other things. Essentially, ideally, you should be aware of what tables get upgraded between each version, and then take into account that changes are going to be made to those tables. So if it's some really large table that gets changed between versions, then hey, there could be some potential downtime. Here I have some examples of the output of that table size. So as you can see, config tables usually take a relatively small amount of space. I have items and alerts, which are the largest ones over here. But even then, they are a couple of gigs. It's not that much. Then if we take a look at history tables for the same instance, remember our largest tables were over a gigabyte, a gig and a half. For this same database, the history and trend tables are 200 gigs, events is 156 gigs, and so on. As you can see, quite large tables over here. Of course, this very much depends how much data you're collecting and so on for each type of data, how much text I'm collecting, how much numerical data am I collecting, and so on. But this will generally look something like this. As you can see, it's not just history, it's also your events that are really large ones. And I'll mention in a moment how to clear that events table up, potentially a couple of ways. One official method and one use at your, well, actually two use at your own risk methods. So the official way to clean up the events table is setting up the event storage period to 1 day and manually executing the housekeeper process until the tables are cleared. So over here, I have the command Zabbix server -R housekeeper execute. This will clean up your events alongside with any other old junk that you have. Run it a couple of times, but on some really large instances, this could not be sufficient. So we need to find some hacky workarounds. So how to do that? So we can write a script, a basic for loop. It's very simple. Essentially, everyone should understand this. And we'll be clearing up all of the events where source is 1, 2, and 3. Essentially, we are not clearing up problem, like trigger-generated events. We're clearing up everything else, internal events and things like that. Usually, there is no need for them from your side. So this is a workaround. I recommend going with the first method, with this here, the housekeeper. But if you are, experienced Zabbix user, if you know what you're doing, then this could be handy. This is handy when you're upgrading from version 3.0, because between 3.0 and 5.0, the events tables, they do get changed. So upgrading the events is going to take a while. So yeah, if you know what you're doing, go with this. But sometimes even this actually, it isn't enough. I've encountered some situations when this wasn't fast enough. I executed this loop. I went out to grab a snack, have a coffee, and so on. I returned in an hour, checked my table sizes, and it was still pretty huge. There was still a couple of hours of work left to clean this up. So I was like, okay, client did not expect this large of a downtime, so I'm kind of in a pickle here. How could I go around this? So one way is, and this is even more risky. I definitely don't recommend doing this if you're not comfortable with Zabbix table structure, if you don't know what's going on under the hood. But what you can do is you can copy events with source 0 to a new table. Instead of deleting events with source 1, 2, and 3, you copy the events with source 0 to a new table. Simple, right? Not really. What you will also have to do, you'll have to drop and recreate all of the constraints referencing the events on other tables. Since you won't have any references to the new table, references will stay linked to the old table. So you'll have to drop the constraints and you will have to recreate them manually. And this, I definitely don't recommend doing this at home. This is just a little kind of a a glimpse at what the support team sometimes does or has to resort to when downtime is a critical concern. So that's something that you can experiment with in your test environment. Definitely go ahead, guys, but don't do this in production. Mess around with it with a backup in testing. And as I said, if you're upgrading from 4.0 to 5.0, as it says at the bottom, there are no changes to the events tables. That's quite nice. That means that this table won't get kind of touched at all. You can just leave all of your old events if you're upgrading from 4.0 to 5.0. And this won't affect the speed of your upgrade at all, even if it's really big. This is just for 3.0 and older to 5.0. So next up, what I'm going to do if I'm, say, upgrading from 3.0, I'm going to create temporary tables for my history. I am renaming history text to history text old, history log to history log old, and I'm creating new empty history tables. Create table history text like history text old, so with the same structure. These are going to be empty tables on which the upgrades are going to be performed. Once again, between version 3.0 and 5.0, there are upgrades that are performed on history tables, history text and history log. So that's why we're creating an empty one, so the upgrade process happens faster. But there is no change to history tables if you're upgrading to 4.0. So if you're upgrading from 4.0, I check your history tables are safe. You're going to be fast even if you have tons of history. You can already see some questions coming in. I think in Q&A. Yeah, if you're using chat for questions, switch to Q&A. This is what we are looking at. We're looking at Q&A for questions. So now let's proceed with the upgrade. I think we've done the hardest part, actually. Upgrading is not that painful. We've done all of the backing up. We've done all of the database cleanup. Now let's upgrade. Our use case, which is a real use case, by the way, something I worked with recently. CentOS 7 with Zabbix 3.0 server, 3.0 frontend, and 3 proxies. One of the proxies uses Amazon Linux AMI OS. Zabbix server uses MariaDB 10.2 as the database backend. And proxies use a mix of MariaDB 5.5 and SQLite. So this is quite a, as we call it, a zoo, when it comes to database backends, different OSs, things like that. So already I'm kind of grabbing my head over here in pain and thinking, oh, something's going to go wrong over here. So first off, let's upgrade the server. Quite simple. By the way, something will go wrong and you'll see. Something that I mentioned in one of my first slides that you should take care of before upgrading, and something that we didn't do before upgrading. But let's take it one step at a time. Let's first upgrade the server. We are RPMing our new repo for 5.0. We are cleaning up the yum cache. Don't forget the yum clean, by the way. Don't forget, otherwise you may do yum upgrade and then it's going to tell you, hey, there are no new versions available. And you'll be like, what? Why? I added the correct repo and everything. But yeah, yum clean cleans up the cache. So it actually checks your newly added repository when it's upgrading things. So I'm upgrading Zabbix server and Zabbix agent at the same time. Everything went well with that. Next up, since this is CentOS 7, there are some changes to the front end. So once again, adding the repo, cleaning the cache, and I'm installing CentOS release SCL repository over here because we will need some components for it. This is CentOS 7 specific. After I have done that, what's new is I have to enable my front-end repo in the zabbix.repo file over here. Enable this one. And I have to completely remove my old web frontend. Yum remove Zabbix web 3 point whatever, because it's a version 3 point something. Upgrading in this case, like upgrade is not supported for the frontend because of some package dependencies. So once I remove my old web frontend, I do a reinstall of it. Yum install Zabbix web MySQL SCL, meaning that it's referencing some packages from the SCL repository, and Zabbix Apache config, since the client was running Apache SCL. Once again, because we have some dependencies on the SCL repo. This is, like I said, something CentOS 7 specific. After that is done, take note that you will have to change your PHP config. And this is where backups come in handy. Why? Because probably you have changed a couple of things in your PHP configuration files, in your web server configuration files, things like that. So since we removed all of the old files when we did the remove, this is where we repopulate these settings from a backup. So for example, over here, memory limit, just take a look at my backup and change it over here, and date time zone. So once that has been changed, my server is up, my front end is up. I think it's time to import the old history data that we backed up. Remember, we upgraded with empty history tables. So I'm inserting my old history data, inserting into the new empty tables, insert into history log, select the corresponding columns from history log old. Same for history text. And this can be done, like I said, my Zabbix server is already up, it's running, everything's good to go. This also prevents some downtime when it comes to data collection. We were collecting data already, now we just reinserted the old data. So maybe server has already been running for a while. Okay, servers are done. Front end is done, agent is done. Database was upgraded before we did all of this. The backend itself, the database backend to a newer version OS. Also, all that remains are proxies. So proxies are quite simple. This proxy, for example, uses MariaDB as its database backend. And same as for the server, the proxy backend database is going to be upgraded automatically once we restart the proxy. If you're using, for example, MariaDB, MySQL, or PostgreSQL, or something like that. For SQLite, that is not the case, as some of you already know. If you're using SQLite as your database backend for proxies, you will have to actually remove the file, the database file, after the upgrade. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing this here error message. The proxy does not match Zabbix database. Remove the file, recreate the SQLite file, and you'll be good to go. And this is where we were in trouble. One of the proxies runs on the Amazon Linux AMI, which uses CentOS 6 packages, which we did not check. No server or proxy 5.0 packages are available for CentOS 6. So we're in trouble. What do we do here? Of course, we could compile from scratch, but time was of the essence. And customer wanted to be sure that he could upgrade his instance in the future on his own. And he wasn't too keen on recompiling things from scratch every time. So what we did it the kind of brute force way. We brought up a whole new machine, a newer version of Amazon Linux AMI, which supported CentOS 7 packages, and we installed that. Not a perfect solution. Ideally, it would be a machine with CentOS 8 just to future-proof it. But those were the options that were available at the time, and we kind of thought that, hey, it's faster to do it this way than compiling it from scratch, since it was quite quick for a client to find a new machine, and installing proxies is quite fast. Last but not least, now you have a choice. If you're upgrading or replacing the agent, you have a choice which agent to upgrade or maybe replace. You can install the C agent, you can install the Go agent. Installation is quite similar, configuration is quite similar. They're essentially twin brothers that had maybe different upbringing or something, but they're very, very similar. So upgrade is done, but that's actually not all. This is, we don't just say, hey, upgrade is done, you're good to go. We also give some recommendations to our clients, and if we're working just internally on a turnkey solution or something like that, or what you guys should also do is consider, okay, what has changed? I've upgraded, maybe performance has improved, maybe I have some new features, but hey, upgrade brings in and changes a lot of existing features, and maybe you need to change some of the existing behaviors to fully use the new functionality. And also, of course, there's verifying the instance integrity, if everything's running perfectly as it should be, and further tuning the config. So let's go ahead, take a look at it, what needs to be done. Of course, after the upgrading, take a look at the error messages in your log file. Any errors encountered during the upgrade process will be logged to Zabbix server log file. Fix these issues. Over here, looks like we have a query failed. Fix the root cause of this. Looks like I think a query that failed was dropping a foreign key. So maybe it's missing. We need to re-add it. Fix this, restart the server, and watch the upgrade proceed. Nowadays, also, if you have a wrong character set or collation in 5.0, and it's also backported, by the way, to 4.0, so if you have a recent version of 4.0, you'll also be seeing this. You could see a message that, hey, Zabbix supports only UTF-8 bin collation. Database Zabbix has default collation of something else. This means that either your database or maybe some specific table columns have wrong collation or wrong character set. And I've linked a ZBX ticket over here on the slides. It'll be available for you, where we have a script by using which you can fix this database collation yourselves, guys. It's quite simple. I've tested it out. It's nothing too complicated. You can do it after the upgrade. Ideally, of course, stop your server instance when you're doing it. Don't want to do any heavy queries during runtime. And yeah, you have to schedule a downtime for this if you have a large instance. It's nothing too critical. If you know what this actually means, it's nothing too critical. If you've worked with Zabbix before and this was there for a long while, this problem, it probably won't be causing any issues like all of a sudden now. But it's just something that should be fixed eventually, as to not encounter any glitches or bugs. And also, you will probably see database is not upgraded to use double precision values. So in 5.0, we have added float 64 support. This is a normal message. We have a separate patch that you will want to apply if you need that extra precision. This is, once again, essentially future-proofing. I've linked the ZBX next with the patch for it. You will not only see these notifications in the server log, you will nowadays also see them in the front end. So here I'm seeing the fixed collation and the database history table is not upgraded. This is what it means. Oftentimes our customers or community members ask us, what does this database history table is upgraded? No, means. It means you're not using the float 64 precision. And there's a patch there to fix this. Next up, let's test our scripts for our integrations. We have a new test feature for your media type, so you can test your scripts out over here, just to confirm that they're working in 5.0. Hopefully they are. Make sure that items that are using user parameters or external checks or something like that are also working. So now we also have a test button here. Verify the performance. Confirm that you're talking to proxies properly, that there is no queue on one specific proxy. If there is, see what's up. Has that proxy been upgraded? If so, has it maybe just been brought up and hasn't yet, started receiving or sending data, and so on. Or maybe if there is a slow query, it could be a sign of something else. You broke your database somehow, completely unrelated to the upgrade, but hey, something went wrong. Next up, optimize the data collection logic. So use the new features. New features such as pre-processing with throttling and data validation on existing items to further optimize both your performance and data collection. Modify the existing items to maybe increase the security for those items by using, for example, ODBC connection string. Double check your API scripts. Definitely do that. There have been some changes made to the API syntax. For example, details property is now mandatory for SNMP interface type. Might break your, for example, host create scripts, because over here I was missing that details section and I got invalid parameters. Worked before, doesn't work now. So just add one line, well, a couple of lines, but it's a small array and you'll be good to go. Consider switching from scripts to webhooks if you're using 5.0. A lot of custom integrations have been replaced with webhooks. As you can see, here's a list. We have Jira, Slack, Signal, and so on and so forth. Quite a lot of them. Webhooks are really simple to implement, really simple to test out. It's really nice to do. Implement the additional security features. By the way, this is something that I was covering in the previous meetup. If you're interested, there should be a blog post available regarding the newly added security features. We're discussing each of these in more detail. Things like masked macros, things like out-of-the-box SAML integration, encryption when communicating with the Zabbix backend database, a lot of security features and improvements. So feel free to implement them now that you've switched to 5.0. And that's pretty much it. In case if some of this was maybe too complex for you or you don't want to risk it doing this on your own, of course, we can help you as support engineers. Zabbix team is always there. We will help you. We will guide you step by step through these things if you want, and document it all for your specific environment. Because environments are different. Things can change, of course, and yeah, this is just one use case that we covered over here. Just one specific use case that I did in real life. Use cases can be different. All right, I think it's time for questions.
So I do have a couple of questions. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so one question is, after upgrade from version 4.2 to version 4.4, and I can just add from myself, this is true for version 5, there are no new templates and no new integrations and other features. So why is that?
Why is that? Because when you're upgrading from an older version to a newer one, we don't change your config, and that includes your templates. So new templates are out of the box present only if you're installing your 5.0 instance fresh. If you wish, you can easily import them. That's not a problem at all. They're all available on our Git page. Maybe we can just send the link later on. Either me or Edgars or someone else can do that to our Git page where you can download those templates and plug them all in, and they'll be there. No problem.
Next question. What if we want clean up events table before we upgrade from 4.2 to 5.0?
This was mentioned on the slides. You're going to be perfectly fine since events table is not messed around with between those two versions. So you won't experience any additional downtime because of that.
Okay, let me check if there are any more questions. Do we have any specific documents, best practice, and known issues about the upgrade? Because there seem to be a lot of issues upgrading from 4.4 to 5.0. That is the question with timescale DB, sorry.
With timescale DB specifically, was that the question? Or?
Yes, TSDB.
As far as I'm aware, by the way, we don't have any specific, feel free to correct me, Edgar, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have any specific issue troubleshooting during the upgrade. We have a webinar that's available that covers upgrade essentially on the same level or similar to what I was covering here. But that's pretty much it. Everything, like I said, else is very user specific and environment specific. Forums are there for your specific use cases. IRC is there. And of course, our upgrade services or troubleshooting services that are available for you.
Okay. And guess this is not really a question about your topic, but still it's there. Is Agent 2 only available for Linux or for Windows also?
It's available for both, though I have to double check if the packages are still are already out for Windows, because I know we had some troubles with providing installers for Windows for Agent 2. I think we're still working on them.
Okay, there are actually quite a lot of questions coming in right now. Let me check if we can answer any more of those. I guess also not about the topic, but is there a way to migrate actions like auto registration settings? I think they probably mean import-export of actions.
Yeah, something that I think I've been also lacking. What I usually do in this case, I use API to import-export them in that way, via API, if I need to replicate them or something like that. Like clone, thing like that. That's where I've actually had a use case like that where I was missing that migrate functionality quite a bit, or a clone functionality. So I used API to implement that. All right, I think I'm going to agree with what some of our guys are saying. Let's leave some of the more complex questions for the Q&A at the end of this year's session. And let's move on to our next speaker. What do you say about that, Edgar?
I agree. Yes, I'll try to answer some of the questions
Toughest ones.
in text.
Okay. All right. So hopefully my screen share is off. I think someone from our side took care of that. Yep. So for our next speaker, second one, another very technical topic. Like I said, this is going to be an engineering heavy meetup. So migration from MySQL to PostgreSQL, a topic that's really hot nowadays when we have implemented full support of timescale DB, something that people are really interested in. And my colleague, Aleksandrs Petrovs-Gavrilovs, will be covering it. An experienced guy, especially after talking on the topic for a couple of times. I think he's had quite a bit of hands-on experience with this. And I'd like to welcome him, and let's see how migration from MySQL to PostgreSQL is done.
So, hello everyone. Nice to see you all here again, and I do heavily hope that you have witnessed our previous meetup. Just let me share my camera. There we go. So, hello again. Nice to see you all here. I hope you did see the last meetup where I presented to you how to actually upgrade your Zabbix in a bit lesser information than Arturs did, not so precise and not covered all of it. So thanks, Artur, for showing everyone. And also, of course, how to actually start using timescale.db and what would be the benefits. And well, the main question, I guess, after that was, well, that looks pretty great. So how can I migrate my MySQL to the PostgreSQL to actually start using timescale.db? And since this question was asked quite a lot, I decided that, well, I guess I have no better option in topics than actually to show you and tell what could be an example of how you can successfully migrate from MySQL to PostgreSQL. But first thing first, so let's just remind ourselves why even should we migrate. So there are not too many reasons if we're thinking about specifically Zabbix database. So I won't be talking about like why MySQL is better than PostgreSQL or why PostgreSQL is better than MySQL. I will be looking at the point of the Zabbix database specifically. And that leaves us not so many reasons to actually migrate. And those are, you are actually better at PostgreSQL. And it's just a coincidence that you have a Zabbix on the MySQL and you will be feeling better and you will be able to tune your database better working with PostgreSQL. That's absolutely a legitimate reason to actually migrate to PostgreSQL. Or you have heard the last meetup or read the announcements and you know that Zabbix now supports the timescale.db. Not only supports it, but actually supports the encryption of timescale.db. The data compression with timescale.db. And of course, so how actually can change your performance of your Zabbix instance. So, but is there really a difference in terms of Zabbix database when we are comparing MySQL and PostgreSQL? Well, of course there is, but actually no. So what are the differences? Are there any? So from Zabbix database perspective, performance of PostgreSQL and MySQL will be almost identical. Of course, if you are MySQL and PostgreSQL guru by your own, you will know all the points and how to actually tune one or another to get the most of performance. But if you're talking about on a knowledge on an average level, they will be more of the same, identical. So again, both will require tuning on one side or another. And of course, you will need to remember about the parameters like, for example, the memory pool, the buffer pool that you actually give to your database. Do you need a transaction log? Of course, how big it should be, how many transactions you want to keep, and so on. And all the other important parameters like max connections and so on and so on and so on. I'm pretty sure you all know some of them. If you have a basic knowledge about MySQL and PostgreSQL, then maybe MySQL would be a way to go for you at first because, well, the partitioning itself can be a bit easier for MySQL than for PostgreSQL. But if you're, again, more knowledgeable about PostgreSQL, then maybe PostgreSQL should be your choice. And since, as you already probably know, Postgres partitioning supports the foreign key. And if we're talking about exactly big amounts of data coming from Zabbix to your database, a lot of reads, a lot of writes, a lot of operations on the disk, then, well, Postgres occasionally can be a bit more stable in case of that high input-output. But overall, again, if you are knowledgeable of one database or other, well, use the one that you know more, or use the one that will be easier to find answers for online, since if something breaks and you don't have Zabbix support, well, you will be on your own, and you will need to look somewhere for the answers what exactly went wrong. So use, again, something that you know how to fix in case something goes wrong. But if you're firmly decided that PostgreSQL is your choice and you are and will be migrating no matter what to actually use the timescale DB or just use PostgreSQL or whatever other reason that you decided, then let's start our preparations. So brace yourselves, we are going to migrate. What I used as a setup, well, this time it's just a bit different from the last time, but still different. So this time I used Zabbix 5.0. At the moment of the tests, it was 5.0.1, if you're interested in that precision. It was CentOS 7. Again, why? Because it's still quite the most encountered version of the CentOS. And MariaDB 5.5. Why specifically that version? Again, just because it's there. It's available out of default repository on the CentOS 7, and you won't need to even add any additional repos. You will be able just to install it out of the box. So if you want to do it fast and just test it out, this is the way. So what is required to actually migrate a PostgreSQL? Well, of course, you will need the PostgreSQL itself. It's hard to migrate a PostgreSQL when you don't have it. You will need the PG Loader, which is the tool that we will use to actually perform the migration. Why specifically PG Loader? Well, mostly because while I was researching what is actually used to migrate from MySQL to PostgreSQL, there were not so many choices, and the ones that were, except PG Loader, were not that much successful, and PG Loader itself was quite popular. I read quite some opinions, some so-called success stories, where people just migrated from MySQL to PostgreSQL and everything went as smooth as expected. So I tested that myself, and with PG Loader, it actually was smooth. And we will need Zabbix source code, and make sure that you download, when we will get to the Zabbix source code of the same version that you are actually already using and from which you will be migrating, since that is quite important, especially if we are talking about LTS versions and possible schema changes. So let's assume we have everything already in place. Now we need to know how to actually migrate. So it will be just as simple as it is. We will take our MySQL and we will migrate it to PostgreSQL. Well, with the help of PG Loader, of course. So let's start with our preparations. At first, of course, you should make a backup of everything. That's the first thing, no matter what. Especially, you might be interested in backupping the Zabbix server configuration file, especially if it was heavily customized or just tuned a bit. Still, better to backup it than not. And of course, if you have some specific web server settings, then you should backup them too. Why? You will see in its own time. And of course, the database, since we will be performing operations with the database, and most of them will be under the hood, most of them will be copying. Still, at any time, anything can go wrong, and backup is something we should always have. But let's do the things that actually relate to migration more than backup itself. So we will need to add the Postgres repo, and we will need to install the Postgres database. For that, you can go to, of course, the Postgres itself, the PostgreSQL.org, and they will have instructions lined up for you for whichever Linux distro you use. Or you can, well, of course, find the guides online, but still, it is quite simple. You see the commands right there. So you get the repo, you install the Postgres. I use the 12th version, the newest one, because the newest one usually has the newest features and, of course, is more stable than the all previous ones. And then you will need to initialize DB itself by executing user PostgreSQL 12, being PostgreSQL 12 setup in DB. And after you initialize DB, then you can actually enable your Postgres in case, for example, your server restarts, and of course, so it will be started automatically, and then start it actually. Then we will be installing pgloader, and as you might notice, there is no repository adding, especially for pgloader. Why? Because it is by default already in the Postgres repos. So you won't need to add anything else. And then just install the pgloader. You can check the version if you want to follow the guide as strictly as possible. In my case, the version was 3.6.2. Then we will need to do something else. We will actually need to create a directory which we will use to work in. And in my case, I didn't come up with an original name, so it was make dir my Zabbix pg Zabbix. So create a directory with any name you like. You can again use it just as in slides, and move to that directory, start working with that directory. Because the next thing we need to do is to actually download the Zabbix source code. Where can you get them? Oh, well, quite simple. You can get them on the zabbix.com page in the download section where the sources are. Then, well, we'll need to actually download them where? On our Linux machine, in my case, in our CentOS machine. So I actually need to install wget. And again, it's in default repo, so you can just run install wget and it will be installed for you. And then just download the sources. Make sure that the version of the sources is the same as the version of the Zabbix you are currently using and the one you will be migrating to. And then unpack it. So unpack it just as you see in the slides or just as you can see in our documentation. Why do we need the sources? Well, we need the sources because we need to recreate Zabbix database schema with all its, of course, constraints, indexes, and so on. And the easiest way to do it is, of course, to get the sources, but you can actually do it the same with the packages. But in my opinion, I think the sources will be easier, so I didn't include the packages instruction. So download the sources, go unpack them, go to the directory you see, and in the directory of the sources, Zabbix version that you downloaded, database PostgreSQL, you will find a file with instructions on how to create the database, the schema of the Zabbix, which is named schema SQL or schema SQL. So you can see the command, first one, the sed command, which basically extracts all the create statements since we will be using them separately. And the first thing we will do is extract all the create statements that actually create the schema and put them in a separate file named create SQL. Then we will get all the alter statements that actually create the indexes, the connection between the tables, and so on and so on. So all the basically alter statements, and we'll get them to a separate file, which I named Arturs-SQL. After that is done, we have those two files. We can move on and actually create a user and create a database in our PostgreSQL by using, well, the same commands as you probably seen if you ever installed Zabbix on PostgreSQL or if you just ever created a Zabbix user. So those are the same as in the documentation, nothing too hard there. And this might be the tricky part, but you can use this as it is. This is basically the script that you will need to actually perform the migration, and which you will need to put in the same directory where you have created the create SQL and alter SQL files. So I've named the script Zabbix migrate load. And as you can see, it contains some statements. So load database, which basically states we will be loading the database from MySQL, so basically from our MySQL, using the user Zabbix, using the password of the user Zabbix. This database is located at localhost in my case, so basically on the same machine. And the name of the database is Zabbix, and we will be migrating it, well, you can guess, into PostgreSQL. And again, the access information and the location of our Postgres database and name, of course, of our Postgres database. Then we add some additional instructions, instructions like do not drop anything from the database, do not truncate any data, since we will be migrating basically all the data, do not create any tables on its own, do not create any indexes, don't create any foreign keys, because again, for that we have the create SQL and Arturs SQL command scripts basically that we already created. And reset all sequences and data only. Data only in pgloader basically copies the data as it is, basically executes the copy statements. And it's quite, I would say, a safe method, again, because you're actually copying, not like, for example, like in Windows, if you do a cut, you know, that when it is pasted to the other location, it is gone. With copy statement, you're basically just trying to copy it. So your data will be a bit safer in case something goes wrong, and you will still have your SQL database, even if you didn't make a backup, but still make sure that you actually made that backup. And then we decide how much memory we can actually share with the pgloader for that process. And of course, the more your machine, your device, your server has memory, the more you can share, the faster the process will be. Since for me, it wasn't that big of a machine, I was able to provide just 1 gig to actually perform it, and the work memory was the 1/4 of a gig. And then we will alter schema Zabbix. And before actually finishing migrating the data, we will execute the create SQL. So we'll create a schema, and then we will execute Arturs SQL to actually create all the constraints, all the indexes, and so on to make sure that our data, that our Zabbix will perform as it should and as it was with MySQL. Why does it need it, especially Arturs SQL? Well, just as for example, if you won't use it and you decide to delete a host, without those constraints, without those indexes, you will be deleting the host. It will be gone, but only the host itself. All the items, all the templates, everything was assigned to him will be left in the database. With, of course, the constraints and indexes, as soon as you delete the host, all the information that is related to the host will be also eventually deleted. So Arturs SQL is important. Make sure you don't forget any of those. But before executing the script itself, so we already prepared to actually run it, we need to do something else. We actually need to stop Zabbix server. Of course, if you don't want to stop Zabbix server and you want to maybe push the data that is left a bit later, you can actually use the pgloader with the copy of the database. So you can make, you can use the backup, just copy data from the backup database to your Postgres. You can even go as hardcore as you please and actually extract the data from the database as a CSV file and then push it to the Postgres. But again, depends on the approach that you would prefer. And so after the Zabbix server is stopped, or after you decided from where you will be copying the data in a way that it won't be updating constantly, you can run the pgloader. And you can run it quite simply by executing pgloader zabbix-migrate, so the name of the script we created, .load. And yeah, I forgot to mention on the previous slide, you could have seen that I'm migrating and copying basically all the data. But if you want to do it fast, you can actually exclude the history and trends table. And then, of course, the data will be copying just in a matter of seconds. but with, of course, the history and the trends, well, it will take quite some time. So when the process will start, you will see warnings. You will see quite a lot of warnings, but that's okay. Do not worry. That's expected, as long as those are not errors, just warnings. And as soon as the process is done, you will see the actual result, where you will see the number of errors. There shouldn't be any, actually. You will see what amount of information was migrated or imported, and of course the total size. Usually, as a thing to remember, when using the PG loader and when migrating basically from MySQL to PostgreSQL, database tend to grow a bit for around plus minus 15%. So make sure you have a bit more space than just exactly the database fits in. And of course, you will see the time of the execution. So my database was, as you see, quite small, but I've made some other tests. And for example, the database that takes 6 gigabytes will need around plus minus 2-3 hours to actually migrate. So if your database is terabytes, well, make sure that you have a lot of time, or make sure you probably do not migrate from live instance, or at least that you use the backups, or just migrating this the configuration, not the history data. So then you are rechecking that everything was executed, just to be sure. So this is what you should see in Postgres. You should see the names, of course, of the tables, of the all the indexes of those, all the foreign key constraints, and of course where they are referenced by what tables. And this is the example of how it approximately should look like. So this is the host table. You can, if you're curious and you actually want to see if history was migrated, if you were migrating history, you can check the history tables themselves and see is there any data. And then the final steps. So remember, I mentioned that you might want to migrate. You might want to copy the Zabbix server configuration file, and of course, maybe the web server configuration file too. And this is why, since we were using MySQL and we have migrated to PostgreSQL, we will also need to use Zabbix server for PostgreSQL, and of course the front end also for PostgreSQL. And that's why we will need to remove the Zabbix server MySQL, and we will need to remove the front end for MySQL. So we will need to remove them completely and make sure you back up everything that was related to the configuration. And after you remove them and back up the configuration, install Zabbix server, but to work with PostgreSQL. And then install the front end, and again to work with PostgreSQL itself. So if you didn't make a backup, edit the new Zabbix server conf. If you made a backup, then replace it, but make sure to change the connection data that is related to connecting to the new Postgres database. And again, if you made a backup, probably your backup contained the information how to connect to MySQL database. And add again your access information to the configuration file. And then delete the previous front-end configuration, because if you won't, Zabbix will try again to connect to the same MySQL, and if you miss some of the steps, you might even log into the front end, which is not connected to any database. But in this case, if you're following it exactly, you will be possibly seeing the front end is trying to be set up. So delete the previous front end configuration, and again, you will need to also go to the web server. So make sure you at least uncomment the time zone. If you had any specific settings, then make sure you change all in relation to what you have previously. And then start the Zabbix server and restart the HTTPD. As soon as it is done, you will need to configure the front end once again, but this time, of course, for the PostgreSQL itself. And you will need to provide the connection to your new PostgreSQL. And recheck it again. So as soon as you configure the front end, log in and see that there are no warnings, that Zabbix server is running, there data is showing and everything is looking as it was before. Just there's Postgres in the backend now. And if everything is okay, execute the last step, stop the MySQL by executing this command, and voila, you have migrated. I congratulate you. Now you can, well, work with PostgreSQL and maybe test out the timescale DB for your own pleasure or for actual performance. So maybe there are some questions.
Yep, there you go. We have a couple of questions. One is, I guess you haven't already prepared for this one. This is a question from me. I guess from Edgars. I remember us asking you this live in the office. So, okay, MySQL to PostgreSQL is clear. What about the other way around? Possible, not possible, more complicated, less complicated?
Well, there is actual possibly, of course, both databases are enormously popular and there are tools to migrate from one side to other side. It's just make sure that you need to make the first migration like from MySQL to PostgreSQL before actually thinking about what if I will need to migrate that. Since both of them will be time consuming if your database is big.
Okay, speaking of time consuming, we had a question related to that. So is there some sort of a reference baseline when it comes to migration where you could estimate how long is it going to take, say the rate, gigabytes per hour or something like that with data migration? Otherwise, well, it's kind of hard for people to estimate, how long is this whole process going to take?
Well, actually, it is hard to estimate and there are no pre-made scripts, but you can use, just as an example, those 6 gigs that take about 2-3 hours to migrate, and you can just, count it for a bigger amount, since it will be plus minus relatively the same in terms of software, but it also, of course, will be relying on how much memory you have, what are the disks that you are using, are there top-notch SSD or they are old hard drives from the basement. So, of course, the better equipment you have, the faster it will be. So, but it's a good option to have a test environment to actually test it before migrating.
Okay, thank you. A couple of more questions. Do we support timescale multi-node, if you're aware of that?
Briefly, since multi-node, as far as I know, is still in beta. So we didn't even yet consider testing because, again, most of the Zabbix databases are big databases in production, and just playing out with the beta software is, I guess, not the best option. So when it will be released, we will, of course, probably test it out and we'll let you know of the results.
Okay, thank you. Next up, any tips how to migrate from Postgres partitions to timescale DB? The comment from the person who asked the question is, as I understand, partitions must be removed before Zabbix timescale SQL can be executed. Is dumping all data and importing without partitions my only option?
As far as I know, that is the only option, mostly because the Postgres before actually allowing to make partitions require that for the partitions tables to be empty. So even if it's timescale DB, it's still partly partitioning. So yeah, you will need to migrate data anyway.
Okay, so we have a couple of more. Let me throw 1 or 2 more questions your way, and we can leave the rest for the end Q&A. Let's see. Apparently, I think this is regarding your slides. So apparently there was a step alter schema Zabbix renamed to public, but no Zabbix schema was created, just a Zabbix database.
Yeah, that's because we actually copied database from one to another, and that specific statement, it looks confusing. It actually confused me a bit, but that happens like in the middle of the data migration. So in the end, it will be Zabbix, we are migrating to database Zabbix. So it will be the same because we're just copying the data as it is.
And the last one, is it possible to migrate databases via API calls only?
Well, not specifically databases, but it is possible to migrate the configuration. It's possible to migrate the data, but it will take quite some finesse and time to actually do that. And well, if you have some already more simple ways, why to do that via API? But you can, essentially you can.
Okay, one more, just one last one. Apparently at the beginning of the presentation, you said that PostgreSQL is a bit more stable than MySQL. Could you elaborate on that? What do you mean by more stable?
Not the Postgres itself. The statement was it can be occasionally more stable, specifically with high input and output. So basically, Postgres tend to resolve the operations that are holding the database more often. Well, not more often, occasionally more often, I would say, than MySQL does. But again, those are just one of the tests. So I didn't have enough tests to make sure that it's always that, but most of the time it was like that.
So are there any like online, for example, performance comparisons or something?
There's a lot, actually. There's even an old I think Zabbix Japan presentation somewhere online where you can actually see the direct comparison with the graph with each statement that I also mentioned.
Okay, yeah, I think that's sufficient. Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you for listening.
And for our final presentation before the final Q&A session today, we will be talking about automation. We will be talking about agent auto-registration and network discovery. Another colleague of mine, Edgars Melveris, certified Zabbix trainer, consultant, engineer. If you if you have a support plan with us, you've probably seen him here and there in the tickets, or maybe he's visited you on site or helped you online. So let's welcome Edgars. Tell us a bit about automation with Zabbix. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, as Arturs said, my name is Edgars, and I will tell you a little bit about automation or automation using built-in tools in Zabbix. So some of the things I will talk about here have already been in Zabbix for quite a while. Some are pretty new, so I hope they will be useful, and I will try to give you some examples of how this can be used in your environment. So I will start with network discovery. So in a lot of situations, new devices are being deployed in your network. Old devices might be taken offline and removed, and you need to monitor those new ones, and you probably need to remove those old ones. And in a lot of cases, well, people do not notify each other fast enough or at all that there are new devices. But network discovery can help you here. So you can deploy Zabbix to automatically scan your networks and check if there is an SNMP device, if there is a device which answers to some specific service, there's a service running there, Zabbix agent running there, or anything else. So the requirements is that you do need to be able to connect to those devices, either from the server or from the proxy. And also you need to understand exactly what you're trying to discover here. So if those are network devices, those devices should be configured to allow connections from Zabbix. If you're scanning for something else, then maybe you have a specific network where you have some types of devices deployed, and then just from the fact that there is a service running on this device, you can decide that this should be monitored with a specific template. So let's get on with it. So what you can do with Zabbix, yes, so speed up deployment. If a new device pops up, well, start monitoring it automatically. Simplify administration, because you can even decide how should this device be monitored, what template should be linked on it, depending on what you discover on the device. And yes, rapidly changing environments, people deploy new devices, remove old ones all the time. And if you don't have some automation tool already in place, which runs when a device is deployed or removed and also does it in Zabbix, then network discovery might help you here. And what you need to be able to do it. First of all, IP ranges. Larger ones, smaller ones, just a list of IP addresses. Well, you need to tell Zabbix where should it be looking for something. And also, list of external services you might want to check, like some examples here on the screen. Also check for Zabbix agent, but here only an encrypted mode is supported. And check for any version of SNMP. If there is an SNMP running, you can try to get some information from it and decide how should this device be monitored. So let's start creating it. So if you go to Configuration, Discovery, and click on Create Discovery Rule, you can create a new one. And before you do that, you need to configure your agents with the correct server parameter. So in this case, we are using Zabbix agent for discovery, and agent must answer to your server or proxy. So you must define the correct address here. Then you need to give it a rule name. You need to give it an IP range and an update interval. We don't recommend to run this too often because most of the devices will time out in most of the cases, and it can take a long time to scan all of the network. And then you must define specific checks. In this case, I'm using ICMP ping, because ping might tell me that there is some device there, but in case Zabbix agent is not running, I might figure out that, well, somebody did not deploy the agent on this device if I know that all devices in this network should run Zabbix agent. And in this case, also Zabbix agent using agent.hostname item to decide how should the host be named. So then you can also select how should Zabbix decide if this is a new unique device. Is the IP address or is it the agent hostname? Also, how should new hosts be created? How should Zabbix decide what hostname should be used? And in this case, I'm using result of agent hostname item. I could also use IP address or DNS name if it resolves. And also how to set up visible name. Okay, when that is done, you create the discovery rule, you wait for a while, and you will be able to see results. So now we have created it, we need to wait, but while you do that, I will tell you a bit more what's possible here. So there's a quite long list of checks, some specific services. If you need to discover something not listed here, you can just use TCP and define a specific port. This is how it looks like. You can use SNMP. So in case of SNMP, you might need to set up community, or in case it's version 3, also maybe authorization and encryption parameters. Or just use Zabbix agent and define any item key you want here. Okay, now when the discovery rule is already running, if you go to monitoring discovery, you should be able to see some results if Zabbix was able to find any device at all. So first of all, if there is any device which does answer to pings, you should be able to see it here. And we can see that I have 4 devices discovered. We can see uptimes for each of the service. This is not the uptime of the device itself. This is uptime since Zabbix discovered this device and this specific service only. And you can also see the IP address here and the DNS name as discovered by Zabbix. So this would have been in use if we would have selected DNS name in hostname in the previous screen. So, but this is currently, Zabbix has just discovered the device. It knows that it's there, but no hosts are created, nothing else is done. So we need to do additional steps to actually automate host creation. To do that, you need to create actions. So you need to go to Configuration Actions and Discovery Actions. And if you're not familiar with the new 5.0 interface, you can see in a screenshot here where this is currently located. And then you need to design your action. First of all, you need to create some conditions. This is where you tell Zabbix in which situation should this action be executed. So first of all, this is already a discovery action, so it will only work on network discovery. And in this case, we have defined 3 conditions. So if this event was created by this specific discovery rule, which I just created. If the discovery event is up, so the device is up, and if that uptime is greater than 10 minutes. So I don't want to discover devices as soon as I notice them, but I want them to be online for a while. 10 minutes is a pretty small time, but for testing, it's good enough. And then under the operations tab, you must tell Zabbix what should it do in case these conditions match. And in this case, what I'm doing is, well, I want to be notified that a device is being added automatically, and I'm adding a host, and I'm linking it to a template OS Linux. And that's it. Now the device should be automatically created. The host in Zabbix should be monitored by this template. And if I go to agent hosts, I can see I have 4 different hosts created here. They are all already being monitored by this template, and the host name comes from agent.hostname. As you can see, it differs from the DNS name. And if I now go back to monitoring discovery, I can also see there is a column here where it lists the host name if this device is monitored by Zabbix. This is how you can tell that it has been created and is being monitored. Okay, what if you have a bit more complicated case and you also have some Windows or maybe some other operating systems in your network? So what can you do in this case? You can base what template should be linked to your host on the results of the discovery. Now, agent hostname usually won't tell you too much, but might. But system.uname, in most cases, will tell you what type of operating system is this. So what I did is I changed the discovery check to use system.uname. And, well, in case if the agent is running on Windows, it gives out, there's a word in the output Windows, and if it's running on Linux, word Linux is mentioned. So, and next what I did is I changed the existing action to contain a new condition, received value contains Linux. And in this case, add it to host group Linux and link template Linux to it. Then I created another action. It differs only with the fact that received value contains Windows. And in this case, it's host group Windows and template is OS Windows. And let's see how the result looks like. So now I'm also discovering this host. Zabbix PC was created. And if I look carefully, it's a bit small probably, but I can see here that template OS Windows is being used to monitor this device. So you can automate how your devices should be monitored. And you're not just restricted to operating systems. If you use any other item which might tell you more specific information about this host, then you can link other templates by the same procedure. Okay, but what to do if the device has been unplugged? Well, maybe it caught fire and, well, it's now removed and will never be seen by Zabbix again. So in such a case, if you go to monitoring discovery, you would notice that this device, it now says right here, and this time now marks downtime, not uptime. So how long since this device has been down? And it's been a moment. But if this device is down for long enough time, I would like to remove it from Zabbix because I don't want to try to monitor devices which are just not there anymore. So how can I do this? I will just create another action. And in this case, I will use discovery status equals down as a condition and definitely use some time interval here. Don't remove devices immediately as soon as they're no longer discovered. Maybe this is just a one-time problem, why the discovery failed, why I couldn't connect there. The next time it might be back up. So do use some time here, but again, I'm using 10 minutes. And in this case, in actions, I'm again notifying myself. So I want to know if hosts have been removed. And we'll just one more operation, remove host. So host is no longer there. If I go back to monitoring discovery, I can see that Zabbix PC is no longer here and it is not monitored. Also, the discovery itself still remembers that there was such a device. Okay, next I would like to tell you about active agent auto-registration. So in some situations, this might be a preferred approach how to automate creating hosts in Zabbix. So let's imagine you are deploying new servers, new workstations, or whatever else where you can install Zabbix agent and would like to automatically create them in Zabbix. But not always you can connect to a device straight from Zabbix. Sometimes you must use Zabbix agent because a connection from Zabbix or Zabbix proxy to a device is just not available. Or in other situations, you might not want to spam your network with continuous discovery checks. In this case, well, what you need to do is deploy Zabbix agent on your newly created host, create some configuration on it, and it will register itself automatically in Zabbix. So what you need to do is, first of all, as I said, install the agent. Then it is mandatory to define at least server active parameter, and this must point to your Zabbix server or proxy. You can use DNS name or IP address, doesn't matter. And additionally, you must define a host name. It's not mandatory to specifically use host name setting here. You can use host name item, or you can even comment both out, and then Zabbix will automatically use system host name. But if you leave the configuration as it is by default when you install a package, the host name will say Zabbix server. And with active agent, the only identification how Zabbix identifies that this is one or the other host is the host name. So you need to be very precise about the host names. And you might also want to define host metadata to help you decide how should this host be monitored, and host interface to tell Zabbix what type of, how should Zabbix connect to this device back, but we'll cover that a bit later in the slides. In this case, you do not need to create any discoveries. So if you have Zabbix agent configured with server active, when it starts, it itself connects to your Zabbix server. And this is already an event. And in Zabbix, you only need to create actions. So again, configuration actions, and in this case, auto-registration actions. And here we can see I created 2 actions immediately. So in one, I'm just using one condition, host metadata contains Linux. In the other, host metadata contains Windows. And the same operations as in discovery. So add to host group Linux, link template Linux, and in this case, Windows. And that's it. So I actually removed those hosts after the discovery and disabled the discovery, and these are now auto-registered hosts using the host name as the host name, using IP address from which it connected to define the agent interface, and you can again see OS Windows linked, OS Linux linked, and they are already being monitored. But what if I do not want to use the IP address for agent interface here? What if I want to use a DNS name because the IP address will maybe change or some other situations? So if you define host interface, and I've defined it as centos50.zabbix.lan. In this case, when it auto-registers, it will define DNS name as defined by host interface, and it will automatically switch to using DNS for passive agent connections to this host. So previously, it still defined a DNS name as it resolved using DNS, but it's using IP by default. So you can use this to override it and use DNS. Okay. And we can see the result here. So this host is now monitored by DNS name. Okay, next, what if you need to use encryption in your environment? So remember, with network discovery, it was not possible to automatically discover agents with encryption. But with auto-registration, it is now possible. Okay, so what you need to do is go to Administration General Auto Registration, and there are, well, 3 modes you can set this up. You can allow non-encrypted agents to register, you can allow pre-shared key agents to register, or both. And if you do allow pre-shared keys, then you define the PSK identity and the key itself here. Now, the downside for this is that it is only possible to use auto registration when using the same key for all of your agents. But it is still better than no encryption if you need encryption. Okay, so on the agent side, in this situation, you need to define some parameters. So I'll be using TLS connect pre-shared key, TLS accept pre-shared key. One is for incoming connections, one is for outgoing connections. I defined the pre-shared key identity as Zabbix, and the pre-shared key file, which contains the same key as I used in the front end. And again, that's it. Don't forget to restart the agent. And now my hosts are automatically registered again, and you can see here that the ones where I defined pre-shared key are now using that for both types of connections. So encryption is already enabled for me. Okay, what if you have a bit more complicated situation and want to also automatically discover what is running on your hosts and you want to monitor those services? So just Linux is not enough. Well, a very simple way to do that is to define host metadata manually. So in this case, I'm using Linux MySQL. Or you can also create some custom script and use host metadata item and use that script as user parameter and write a script in a way that it will return some meaningful information which you can use in auto registration. Okay, and in this situation, I also created another auto registration action, auto register MySQL servers. And in case host metadata contains MySQL, and it does in this case, well, also notify me, add host to host groups MySQL servers, and link MySQL template to it. And again, that was all I needed to do. The host was created. This one actually existed even before, but now it also linked it to template MySQL, and it's also still linked to OS Linux. We have 3 host groups here, so there is one which is automatically used in case of discovery. Also, it's in host group servers Linux and in host group MySQL servers. And you can see these 2 templates here. And it's now linked to both because both actions matched. The host metadata contained Linux, so the previous action still works, and host metadata contains MySQL, so this action also matched. Okay, but what if you're, and it automatically registered, and if I go to my graphs, I can already see some MySQL performance graphs coming in. In reality, you need to do a bit more tuning on the agent side to enable monitoring the way I did. But if that is done correctly, if the agent is deployed correctly, then you can already monitor your MySQL. But what if you decide that this host will no longer service MySQL and maybe it will do something else? So can you remove it from that template also? And yes, you can. Another action, remove MySQL from host. Host metadata does not contain MySQL. And what I'm doing in this case, removing it from the host group, unlinking from the template. And immediately, well, the host is no longer linked to MySQL template and is removed from that specific group. That's all I wanted to tell you right now. So thanks for listening. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Edgars. There are a lot of questions. Sorry, but you will have to stick with it. All right, so where should I begin? There's really a huge list. So, okay. So let's start with simple ones. How do you automatically remove auto-registered hosts?
You don't, because there is no event Okay, you could do it with some very interesting scripting, but in case this auto registration event happens when the host connects to Zabbix. In case if the host is now down, it no longer connects to Zabbix, and there's just no event to react for. You could create a trigger that could see if the host has been down for a day or a week or whatever. It could execute a custom action, which would execute a script, which would go back using Zabbix API and removes the host, but not natively using auto registration function.
Okay, thank you. Next up, something very similar. What about, can you use system.hostname together with domain as a DNS for auto registration? So combine those two together, system.hostname plus domain name or something like that.
You can configure two agent checks in network discovery. So you could possibly use both of them, results from both of the checks.
Question
so
was
you're not
registered, by the way. The question
auto-registered, no. In auto-registration, you use either system hostname or host metadata. So in that case, you would need to use input that information in host metadata. But in conditions, then you can use both the host name and host metadata.
Yeah, and from my side, if you wish to maybe combine values from different items or just add some sort of a prefix or suffix to your system.hostname, you could create a user parameter that could obtain that and execute it in the host metadata item.
Yes, yes. Or, well, define the host name itself as a host name item and define maybe the fully qualified name there and use that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Next up, something. Oh, we have more questions coming in. Can you make discovery based on active agents, or does the agent needs to be passive?
No, for discovery, it only uses passive agent because discovery, the server connects to your agent. If the agent is connecting to the server, there you can only use auto registration.
Okay, something a bit more simple regarding how actions work. Do actions stack, or do they just do the action that is matched first? So if multiple actions kind of match, conditions of multiple actions match.
It will execute both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that is the answer. So they do kind of stack. Next up, using of port forwarding. Would it be possible to apply different templates to hosts that were discovered using different host ports, I guess, on the same IP or something?
Can you repeat the question? I think I didn't quite get it.
Let's say same IP, different ports. Can we scan specific ports for specific responses or something like that on the same IP?
Yes. Okay, if you're talking about Zabbix agent, you can add another check and you can define what port should be used. Or just define another discovery rule and define in that check what port should be used. If we talk about some other services generally, for all the services, you can define what port it should connect to. So probably yes, if I understood the question.
SNMP. So can you specify the port when you're doing an SNMP service check?
I think yes, but honestly, I would need to check. I've never done it.
I actually also think that you could. But we'll double check it, yeah. Okay. More questions coming in. Okay, a bit more general ones. Let's see. Discovery with SNMP version 3. How is the authentication part on the host configured in Zabbix 5?
When in discovery, you configure that in the discovery itself. And then when the host is created, it just uses the same settings as in the discovery.
Mm-hmm. Another simple one, if you're using metadata item, so host metadata item to, decide which template to add. If you remove some software or change a setting, will the host metadata item value, will it change dynamically, or how will that work?
Yes, host metadata item, it will execute the specific item each time it connects to your server to retrieve active agent set configuration updates. and each time it will execute them, and if something has changed and the item now returns different data, so that one will be forwarded to Zabbix.
And we had this question even before. I think you've already seen one. I think that's going to be the last one before the general Q&A. Is there any plan to implement the possibility to fetch value from host metadata when making the auto-registration process? Use case is to publish different PSK encryption key per host and use the collected value to be set up under host configuration.
Let me check the question. I think I did not quite get it.
Actually, did not see this. Fetch value from host metadata when making the auto registration. Okay.
So,
like the key with it or something like that is the question.
So publish the PS key in metadata. I'm not sure if you're transferring the key unencrypted even on the first connection. I don't think it's a good idea to do that. But I haven't heard of any plans for such a thing.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna let you go now. Thank you a lot. We have a lot more. Don't go too far. We're gonna have a general Q&A in a minute, so you'll be helping me out there. Yeah, thank you guys. This was our last presentation. Like I said, a lot of technical ones, but don't go anywhere yet. We have a general Q&A. We have a lot of questions still lingering out there, waiting to be answered. And before we move on with that, I'd like to announce our next Zabbix Online Meetup dates. So August 13th is going to be one of those. That's going to be the next one. And September 22nd, upcoming meetup dates. I'd like to also ask you guys for your help, for your ideas for upcoming topics, because one thing is the topics that we kind of decide upon. You know, we are the support engineers. We are the guys working in the trenches of Zabbix, and we see things the way we see things. Maybe you would like to hear about different topics. Maybe you have a different kind of value system for yourselves as users. So feel free to send those topic suggestions to either marketing@zabbix.com or conference@zabbix.com. We will take a look at them. So any topic suggestions, things that you want to hear us talk about, just drop them by. Those email addresses, I think I'll ask my colleagues to paste those in the chat if possible. So marketing@zabbix.com or conference@zabbix.com. And we'll be waiting for your suggestions. And then based on those, we will pick a bunch of topics and cover them in the August and September meetups. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, my dear colleagues, for these knowledgeable and very technical presentations. I know it took you a while to go through them yourselves because, yeah, they do take some experimentation and, fiddling around in a real environment. So now let's move on to general Q&A. So let me go through a list of questions. And if I cannot answer it, I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me out with this. So if a specific SNMP alarm is generated continually, is there any correlation mechanism to be displayed to essentially hide it so it's not displayed many times? So of course, first off, we have single or multiple problem generation. So if it's a single problem generation, it's just going to be a single problem that stays kind of lit up until it gets resolved. Or you can also use some correlation rules if they're not quite similar problems coming from different triggers. We have a correlation logic for that. So maybe that's something that you want to hear us talk about later on. Once again, drop your suggestions to the aforementioned emails. Next up, let's see. A question to Edgars, I guess, regarding his previous topic. So do offline hosts stick forever in the discovery rule results?
Yes, actually they do. But it doesn't really affect Zabbix too much. It's just an entry in the database.
Okay. Next up, is it possible to check dynamic HTML tags and how do I do it? So I'm actually not sure what is meant by the question. Can you guys maybe chime in? Dynamic HTML tags. If not, we can leave it for later maybe. Question for Edgars. Is there a recommendation when it comes to subnet size for discovery in order to avoid overload, heavy network traffic, etc.?
The general recommendation is just don't create too big subnets, because one execution of the discovery will just take a long time. Let's imagine you have /24, so roughly 255 addresses, and you have 2 checks, and you have default timeout setting of 4 seconds. So if all of the hosts, worst case scenario, if all hosts timeouts are, the discovery will wait for each of the IP address for 2 specific checks there for 4 seconds. So that's around 500 seconds. So if you create even bigger ones, you will just need to wait a long time until it finishes this discovery and starts a new one. And maybe there's a device there already waiting to be monitored, and it's just not discovered because the discovery is still going through that long list of IP addresses. So it's better to create more discoveries with smaller network segments.
Thank you. Next up, about our integrations. I'm going to try and cover this one. Does Zabbix support integration with other monitoring systems, Microsoft SCOM, for example? So we're currently working on our out-of-the-box integrations. I checked the integration section while Edgars was kind of covering for me a moment ago. We do have some community integrations with SCOM, currently no official ones, but that is a very dynamic kind of decision-making process. And if you ask for something specific kind of loud enough, and we see that, hey, there is a large enough use case for it, a large enough user base for this specific integration, then we might as well create it eventually so it's available out of the box for you guys. So currently there's just community ones, but if many enough ask often enough or be vocal enough about it, we might as well notice that and integrate it later on. Where is monitoring dashboard graphs gone? Has it disappeared in Zabbix 5? Does anyone want to cover this one? I guess that's going to be a no. Alex, maybe you want to cover this one?
Well, I absolutely can. So they didn't actually go too far. So if you go to the monitoring hosts, you will find appropriate graphs for each of the hosts.
Okay, so it's moved a bit to monitoring hosts. Yeah. Scary question. Once again, if you dislike something, just be vocal about it. If you wish something to be moved back, or to some other subsection, create a feature request and vote on it, and make sure that people that agree with you also notice it, because like I said, community is a big part of our product, and we value your opinions. And hey, we make a lot of great things, but sometimes something that seems amazing to us maybe seems not as great to some subset of people, and then we need to compromise and things like that. Maybe it's a use case like that. So yeah, be vocal about it. Don't be afraid. We don't bite. When will we release Agent 2 for Windows environment? So I know that there have been some internal kind of delays with that. I don't have an estimate, an ETA for it. Should be sometime soon, but I've been saying that for a while. I think there should be a bug report or a feature request. I'm not sure, but if you search our bug tracker, it will be there. And you can take a look at the discussion that's going on over there directly with the developers, and they'll probably be able to answer you a bit better regarding this here specific question.
Arturs, if I can stop you, I think I now understood when I read it, previous question, and probably I didn't answer it correctly. So can several SNMP devices be discovered as different hosts from one IP address, but using different ports? Like in port forwarding case. Yes, generally yes, but there, as I told you, there was this one parameter called device uniqueness criteria. By default, it's set on IP address. If the IP address will be the same, you need to define a different device uniqueness criteria, and it could just be the result of one of those SNMP checks So you can define a specific OID, and that should return something unique. And preferably, you could also give the device host name from the value returned by that SNMP check. And in that case, yes.
Don't go anywhere. Another question: where we can generate PSK value for auto registration?
Use OpenSSL command line. I think there are even some online tools. I always use one OpenSSL command. I think I can just paste it in the chat window if you want to in a moment. Okay.
Yeah. So let's just feel free to post it in chat, guys. Just take a look keep your eyes on the chat. Edgars will help you out with that. Question for Alex. If I want to upgrade from MySQL to timescale, do I first need to upgrade to PostgreSQL?
Yep, that's exactly what you will need to do. Not to, upgrade, but to migrate, essentially, first. But you can actually, when it will be published, take a look again at the slides from the presentation that was shown today, and then check out the previous meetups, and you will also find how to actually upgrade and move to timescale DB with all the commands that you might need to actually do that.
Yep, thank you. Next up, can you discover items like registry entries, gather data based on the findings with PowerShell? You definitely can. You can create a custom low-level discovery rule if you want to that will do that, no problem. Once again, it's a whole topic on its own. It's covered in one of our training courses, quite a bit in depth, professional, I think nowadays is. I'm going to talk about training courses and how most of these topics are actually answered there with a practical task in a moment. So yes, you can do that, but I don't think we have the time. That'll take multiple hours to just cover on its own. But you can do that. Take a look at our documentation. You will see some examples there. Will Zabbix support gRPC? Does anyone know about gRPC, guys, over here? Because I'm not sure.
I'm not so familiar, unfortunately, with specifically gRPC, but judging by our integration page, there are some solutions to actually retrieve gRPC related data. So there are some integrations.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Once again, if the feature requests and the votes are there, then it will definitely be put on our roadmap. Where do you set default device criteria for host name? DHCP recs things with IP address. I guess this is more of a discovery question for Edgars.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Where do you set the default device criteria for host name?
If this is about discovery itself, then in discovery rule. So if you go to configuration discovery, and you can, if you have any, just click on them or click on create new discovery. There are those three parameters: device uniqueness criteria, host name, where you can set IP address or DNS name or a result of any of the checks, which do return value, and how to set visible name. So this is where you define it.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, what else do we have? Something about how can we auto-discover enabled Linux system services and which are running or stopped, failed? This is crucial so as to monitor all of our defined services. I think we did have some, Edgars, can you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong? We did have some out-of-the-box low-level discovery for Linux services.
Agent 2 has built-in systemd services discovery, so that one can be used.
Other than that, you can always use a custom script, as I said before, to send all the data that way. All right. What is the roadmap to provide monitoring for cloud, AWS, Azure, etc.? Is Zabbix capable of doing that compared to other cloud monitoring? Yes, Zabbix is capable of doing that. I remember, I think AWS integration was on the roadmap. Let me double check if, or at least it was mentioned briefly a while ago. Let me double check if it's there. Not there yet, but I think cloud services is something that will provide official integrations for sooner rather than later. But you can still monitor them nowadays by using HTTP checks and talking to the cloud API directly. And there are tons of community solutions available in our integrations page that do just that. So it's currently available. It's just you have to set it up yourself. And sometime in the nearby future, we'll probably provide an out-of-the-box available tool set to do that. Let's see. What else? Is there a page where there are agent config environmental values like system host name, system uname? So, my guess would be if you wish to get all of those agent values, you can always use the print or test keys on the agent itself, or use Zabbix get command line tools to obtain those. That's something that you can do remotely if you don't have items configured for those, but they're not, listed anywhere in the front end for each agent item on each of the agent hosts. So you'd have to.
But you can get a list of all the built-ins. I'm pasting a link into the chat from our documentation. So all built-in items are listed there and have very good commentaries.
And there's also a short but understandable description in the front end itself about all the agent items.
Couple more questions. Are there any plans to add support for the ClickHouse DB backend or other features from the Glabber fork of Zabbix? As far as I know, and once again, just a bunch of support engineers over here, it hasn't been officially stated anywhere. Who knows what's going on, under the hood, what's being discussed, but officially, unfortunately, there's nothing that I know of.
Just from my side, there's nothing officially, but just if you're curious to test it out, I've seen people actually checking out and actually configuring Zabbix with ClickHouse, similar to Elasticsearch, and it apparently worked. But it's just if you want to check it out and more play with it, there's nothing official yet, but it will work if you try it out.
Okay, so apparently, there should be some community documentation or something like that. Any official templates available for Oracle DB? I'm not sure. Edgars, Alex, do you maybe know if there's anything in the new agent, maybe in 5.0 or anything?
Oh, well, at least no official templates for the moment. Maybe you can check some other questions, and I will check if I can find out if there is a roadmap for it.
Okay. Then next up, self-healing and bots. Any solution available and roadmap to predictive monitoring? Edgars, I think that was something that you were covering, predictive monitoring specifically when you were talking about 5 features a while back.
Yes, well, it was not implemented in 5.0. It is still planned, hopefully for 5.2, but yes, there is a plan to introduce machine learning into Zabbix and use a type of a baseline data for creating triggers, but no more details for the moment.
All right. Any template available for Veritas cluster? Once again, just check our official homepage, check the integration section. If there is an official template available, the link will be there. If it's not, then there will be links to community solutions. And if there's no community solutions and no official links, then take a look at the forums. They should be there. All right. Then the one question that I already mentioned to you, Edgar, behind the scenes, the Docker monitoring one, which requires the user to be added to the Docker group, which can be considered not secure. What are some security precautions that we can take around this? Did you have the time to look into it? Because honestly,
I could give a general answer, and I'm not that familiar with this specific case about Docker, but I know other cases where An application just doesn't deliver the information we need in any other way, except for if you have some specific permissions. And in some cases, those permissions are too much. And I do agree that it might not be secure. So, and this is just a question to you. If you know a better way, if you know how we could get that information without giving Zabbix so much permissions, please create a bug report about it, and we will be glad to change it. But if there is no other way to get the data, then we just need to use it that way. Now, another approach being used in a lot of cases, situations like this, but it's not very simple, it's quite complicated. But you could create some script which might run with higher permissions to get all the data that you need about your Docker or whatever else, and send it to Zabbix using Zabbix Trapper, or write it to file and tell Zabbix to read that file, and do things like that. But it's not very convenient to do it. I'd say it's an ugly workaround. But if security is a concern to you, you can use something like that.
One more question to you, and then two more questions that I can cover. So auto-registration regarding the host metadata contains condition. Why is there only an option to combine these with only an or, not with an and? Are you aware of that? So when you're defining multiple host metadata contains conditions in your auto-registration actions. Apparently, there's no way to select an and.
Give me a moment to check, because for some reason.
Okay, while you're checking, I'll cover the other.
There is. If you add more than one condition there, it automatically selects or, but you can select type of calculation to use and, or even design your custom expression and write your own type of calculation and be very specific which condition should match with which one in what way. So it should be possible.
Two more questions I can probably cover. User parameters are restricted up to 512 kilobytes of data that can be returned. Is there a consideration to increase the limit? Someone's hitting a limit when retrieving the file names from the host to monitor the directory contents. Makes sense. I'm not sure if the feature request is already there. If not, this definitely warrants a feature request, so feel free to create it. I'm seeing your use case quite clearly here. It's quite simple, and it's a good use case to increase that limit. Yeah. Then next up, I would like to add some Unicode 6.0 emoji in the subject of the email message templates. The idea is to highlight in the email subject problems with red circles and recoveries with green circles. However, the database doesn't like that. And apparently there is some error message on the database level because Unicode 6 is not supported. Would you consider allowing Unicode in future releases? If once again, if the requirements are there, and once again, it could be future proofing, then eventually, yeah, I think we've done a lot of database work lately, and this seems very reasonable. So yeah, once again, if the requirements are there, then yeah, sure. And the last question, let me see, that's a long one.
I can actually try to answer this. I read it previously. So, and I agree, and I know your pain. So, how do you know when we have created or updated?
Edgar, we're losing you a bit. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. How do you know when we've updated some of our existing templates or added a new one? And yes, I agree, and I will probably try to discuss it a little bit internally, that we should notify users a bit more when there are updates. You can, of course, follow Git and see updates in Git, but yes, well, general notifications might be good. And additionally, if we implement template versioning, this might also help there.
Okay, I think that's generally all of it. So thank you a lot, guys. Just a little note before we finish up. All of this, pretty much all of this is covered in our training. So nowadays we have a user training, we have a specialist training that was extended to 5 whole days, a lot more content, a lot more hands-on experience. Same goes with professional, that's been extended to 3 days. And that there's also up and coming expert for 5.0, which will also be greatly improved and tuned for you guys. A lot of hands-on experience. If you wish to have, hands-on experience with troubleshooting Zabbix, implementing H8, things like that, that's what expert is going to be for. And of course, specialist and professional, if you wish to just learn to configure Zabbix from A to Z, and professional, if you wish to learn some custom things, custom low-level discovery, custom checks via user parameters or scripts, and so on. So all of that is covered in our trainings. Definitely take a look. Right now they're virtual online, so you don't have to, travel or do anything. You can do it from the comfort of your living room. So yeah, there you go, guys. That was it. That was our second meetup. Once again, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues, both engineers besides me present here, Edgars and Alex. Their help was very much welcome in their presentations also, and everyone behind the scenes. We're working very hard, engineers, marketing team, designers, everyone, to get this going to you, to add a lot of useful value to the product with these here sessions that we are holding over here. And like I said before, suggestions, recommendations, and general feedback are always welcome, guys. You're a large part, the community is a large part of our product, and we wish to hear your concerns, best wishes, and suggestions. So thank you, guys. That was it for the second meetup. See you in August, guys. Thank you. Bye.